State Farm is committed to being your top choice when ensuring the things that matter to you. My Cultura podcast host, Dramos, also believes in the power of financial knowledge. That's why he makes sure to share his financial tips on his podcast, Life as a Gringo.
When I was wanting to purchase my first home, I wanted to buy a property that also made me money, So with the property that I purchased, I actually have a tenant.
Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Learn more at es.statefarm.com. State Farm is a proud partner of the My Cultura podcast network.
Introducing Uber Teen Accounts. If you have a teenager, you probably drive them around a lot. Maybe you're even driving them right now. New Uber Teen Accounts are a parent-supervised Uber account with always-on safety features that let your teen request a ride when you can't take them yourself. Your teen gets to ride with a highly rated driver, and you get to follow along with real-time notifications and live trip tracking in your Uber app. Add your teen to your Uber account today. Available in select locations. See app for details.
It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Meadow with you for the next 60 minutes. The program presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Multiple ways to interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also hit us up on Twitter, #GiantsChat, and directly interact with the two of us. I'm at Lance Meadow, one word, last name, M-E-D-O-W. He is at Giants WFAN. And a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So the Giants still trying to finalize their coaching staff, Paul, but the other day we found out that another vacancy has been filled. Joe Thomas is going to serve as the running backs coach. He comes over from the New Orleans Saints, spent the last 9 seasons there, and Aaron Wellman is back after he spent 4 seasons previously with the Giants, went to Indiana University. He's now going to return and help fill the void left behind by Craig Fitzgerald. So little by little, the Giants are putting the pieces of the puzzle together here.
Well, consider a couple of things here. First of all, Thomas was with the Saints, which means he worked with Alvin Kamara. And I think that's certainly something that opens your eyes a little bit, because Kamara is one of the premier all-around running backs in the league. And obviously Saquon Barkley fits into that same description. And so you wonder how many things that he was able to maybe polish up with Kamara that maybe he can utilize here with Barkley. So that's the first thing about Thomas. The second thing about Aaron Wellman, during the 4 years he was here, 2 of those seasons were 2 of the healthiest seasons the Giants have had in the last decade. Now, I'm not going to say all the other guys were bad and blame them for the Giants' bad luck with injuries.
So he has the magic touch.
Just as I'm not going to say he necessarily automatically means the team won't get hurt. That would be unfair to everybody involved. But I can still say that in 2 of his 4 seasons, this was a relatively very healthy team. If that was a coincidence, so be it. I do know that when he was here, he was a no-nonsense guy. He had discipline. He had great respect from the players. They liked him very much. The reason he left the Giants to go back to Indiana University was it was home for him. And then they had a change in the coaching staff after this past season.
Yep.
And so there's going to be upheaval. And the Giants happen to have a spot. And so now this is kind of his second home. He comes back to his second home where he was very comfortable once before. So that kind of clears up any questions you may have about those two fellas in terms of what they might be able to bring to the table here. The Giants still have some more spots to fill, and I think all of us are clearly the most curious about the D.C. spot. I know the special teams spot is also of interest, but the D.C. spot for me is probably the one that holds the most gold. That's the one that special teams, I never downplay specials. But the D.C. spot, the reason it is for me, Lance, and I had Jonathan Casillas on the show the other day, and one of our huge topics was, when you look for this next D.C., does he have to be a 3-4 guy? or can he be a 4-3 guy?
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that too.
Or can he be a multiple guy? To me, that is a very significant question as you continue to shape this roster.
Well, I don't think you should say, you only need a 3-4 guy, you only need a 4-3 guy. That's why when you do the interviews, if I'm Brian Dable, I'm basically asking, okay, evaluate the defense. And if you did go in a different direction, how would you fit all of the pieces in? And if that's appealing, you have an entire offseason.
You do.
And they're going to have to learn a new scheme.
But there's only so many floorboards you can rip up.
Sure, 100%. But the bottom line is it's going to be a new scheme, no matter how you spin it, because it's going to be a new coordinator, and he's not going to do everything the way that Wink Martindale laid it out. Every coordinator who comes in always is going to want to put their own stamp on it. So there's going to be a certain level of change regardless under the circumstances. The other thing that I wanted to add about Wellman, which is I think why it's appealing, he knows the organization.
No doubt.
He knows Ronnie Barnes. He knows how they operate. And that's important because you're bringing back somebody that, yes, has familiarity, but also knows the people in the building on the medical side.
Well, he was very well thought of from top to bottom. And again, the reason he left was to go home. Indiana was home for him. He had a lot of roots there. And so when that opportunity came up, you'll always meet guys in different professions who will say, oh, wow, I have a chance to go back. I can go where I cut my teeth. I can go where my roots are. Many of people will do that just because that's home cooking for them. And it has nothing to do with any potential dissatisfaction that they may have had or bad reviews or grades. Wellman was a top-of-the-line guy who simply wanted to go back to Indiana. That's all it was. And so it's great to see him.
And we've seen other coaches come and go, too, over the years.
Oh, sure.
With respect to position groups. I'm not just talking about necessarily on the medical side. It's not unheard of. Hey, in today's day and age, for somebody to stay in the same job for decades is really unlikely. Given the turnover rate we see on the NFL level, it is, once again, rare territory you're talking about under the circumstances. But to your point, getting back to the defensive coordinator spot, yeah, that individual is going to have an opportunity to put their stamp on this team. And you're talking about a defense, once again, that was very opportunistic last season. 31 takeaways, tied for first in the NFL, plus 12 turnover differential. And, of course, special teams contributed to that turnover differential as well as the takeaways, but also tied for first in that category. Can you have a scheme that enables you to not necessarily duplicate that, but put your players in a position to still take the ball away at a relatively high rate? I think takeaways, once again, I think it's a product of the scheme. I don't think it's luck. I think having players in the right place at the right time certainly fits into the equation, but I do think scheme creates takeaways, and Wink was very effective in doing that. Can the next individual have some semblance of that? That, to me, is something to watch for.
Now, you know what's interesting about the Giants with their 31 takeaways this year? They did such a good job, specifically with the interceptions. I think the final number was 18.
I can look it up. Yeah, I think it was 18-13 was the breakdown, I believe.
Okay.
So. But I'll bring it up to confirm.
I think they were tied for first in the NFL.
They were.
In interceptions.
Yep.
Okay? Now think about that. Usually when you have a heavy press man scheme, you don't get a lot of interceptions.
Sure.
They tell you all the time because your guys are too concerned of tracking their receivers that they're not necessarily watching the ball or watching the quarterback like you do in a zone, okay, where you're just worried about your space. No, you're trying to be sticky. And that requires too much focus that you can't really spend a lot of time thinking about going to get the football. And you certainly can't spend a lot of time trying to look for the football. And yet, despite the press man coverage that the Giants played, they finished tied for first in the league in interceptions.
Well, just for clarification, I'm looking it up because I thought you meant takeaways and turnover differential. The highest interception tally this year was actually Cleveland, 23.
Were they second or third?
No, they were. You had the Patriots and the Commanders had 21. Wait, hold on. This was giveaways. Never mind. Check that. Hold on. Let's clarify that. Bears were number one, and the Niners each had 22.
Okay.
So then the Ravens, the Bills, the Browns, the Saints, and the Giants all finished tied for third.
Tied for third. I knew they were high.
Yeah.
Takeaways, they were tied for first, I believe. Picks, they were tied for third. Okay.
Picks, they were tied for third.
All right.
That's correct.
Point being, that's still a ridiculous amount. Now, how does that happen? This is part of why Wink Martindale would say all the time, don't talk about sacks, okay? Talk about sacks, quarterback hits, and hurries, because those three categories combined, okay, accumulate as, quote, pressures.
And impact the quarterback.
That's what he always wanted, because what happens? You don't sack the quarterback, but you got him throwing off his back foot, and he throws an erratic ball that gets intercepted. So sometimes you're better off just getting the pressure and the quarterback hit than you are getting the sack, because the pressure and quarterback hit turns into an interception. And that's why Wink focused on that pressure number instead of the individual sack number, which is only 1/3 of the equation. So it will be very interesting to see whoever the Giants hire, not only are they 3-4, 4-3, or multiple, how much press man do they want to play, and how do they value sacks as compared to overall pressures? These are all tweaks and philosophies that every guy's going to have because they have their own individual schemes and game plans and priorities. So I'm fascinated by whoever fills the defensive coordinator spot. I cannot wait to talk to this person to find out about their idiosyncrasies. It's going to be a fascinating conversation. I cannot wait for that one.
Well, because once again, he's got some young players to build upon, and you also want the trajectory of the development of some of these players to continue to rise. For example, Micah McFadden is coming off of a breakout campaign.
No question.
How does the new coordinator utilize Micah McFadden? Bobby Okereke is coming off of a really strong season. How does the new coordinator utilize Okereke? Isaiah Simmons, does he have a role in this new defense? Dane Belton had a coming-out party late in the season. Mm-hmm. Does he take on an expanded role? All questions that are pertinent. The other thing, though, that I wanted to add to, you were talking about how normally when you have cover corners, man-to-man defense, normally they don't get a lot of interceptions. I think what's interesting as I bring down the breakdown, Paul, believe it or not, the safeties and the linebackers were responsible for a lot of the interceptions this season, not necessarily the corners. Because, normally you would think, all right, if you have 18 interceptions, your corner is going to have the bulk of them. It was the safeties and the linebackers. Well, case in point, McKinney and Pinnock were the top two guys in interceptions, and Okereke was tied with Pinnock. So you had, between those three guys, just to add up, you had 7 interceptions between McKinney, Pinnock, and Okereke.
Yeah.
And Belton also had 2. So you could throw him in. And Isaiah Simmons, he had 1, and there were a few guys tied for 1. But high volume from those positions.
But again, why does that happen? It happens because quarterbacks did not have time to throw.
Yep.
And they hurried it, or they were off balance, or their mechanics were screwed up because they were worried about getting hit, and they threw errant passes. Passes that were so errant that it wasn't necessarily the corners who were covering the guys who were getting the picks, but the ball was so errant in the vicinity of the target that somebody else was able to come over and make the play.
Well, but also I would argue safeties and linebackers are more in a position to be facing the ball as opposed to corners that are not necessarily looking for that.
No doubt.
So that, I think, also speaks volumes that within the defense of man-to-man, it's not as if you can't get interceptions, but it's just harder for your corners because they're so much more focused on the guy they're defending as opposed to where the ball is. That's all. And I just thought that was interesting when I was breaking down the tally of the interceptions. Now, once again, Cordell Flott, Adoree Jackson, Nick McLeod each had a pick. Deontay Banks had 2. Darnay Holmes had 2. So you got about 7 interceptions from your corners, but you got 11 from the linebackers and the safeties. And I don't think that's, once again, coincidental based on the structure of this defense. I think that goes hand in hand.
I got a number for you. This was only the second time in Giants history they had 4 interception returns of at least 50 yards apiece. You'd have to go back to 1997, and I did my research on this. You had Garnes, Sparks. Who else did I write here? Wooten and Armstead, who did it back in 1997. Giants had 4 picks, returns of more than 50 yards apiece this year.
And they had 4 non-offensive touchdowns this season.
Yeah.
3 on defense, and then, of course, Gunnar Olszewski's return against the Rams, which was much needed based on the offensive struggles this season.
It was the 7th time that the Giants had returned at least 3 interceptions in a season for touchdowns. Just a couple of historical numbers that I dug up.
Well, and to me, once again, this is going back to bring our conversation full circle about the coordinator. The last time the Giants had at least 30 takeaways in a season, which is not easy to accomplish, was when Spags was here in 2012. So, I mean, do the math, Paul. Well over a decade, the last time a Giants special teams was responsible too. So I'll say the combination of special teams and defense combined for at least 30 takeaways. That's big shoes to fill.
Sure it is.
For that next coordinator to come in. This is why when we talk about outlooks of seasons, you don't just take the numbers from the previous season and say, okay, you add a few players and you pick up where you left off and you add some more seasoning. That's not how the NFL works, especially when you change coaches. You really almost go back to square one and determine, okay, can we scratch the surface of that? But to think you're going to duplicate and add to it, I think is just unreasonable.
And ironically, that season, the Giants had 21 picks with 33 sacks. And I'm pretty sure that's right about the number they had this year.
Well, I have the numbers. They had 34 sacks and they had 18 interceptions.
Yeah.
That was the breakdown.
Those numbers are kind of remarkably similar.
Yeah.
Now, what I don't have are the pressure numbers from that year from the Giants.
Yeah, and I don't have that in front of me.
I don't have the pressure numbers. But very interesting how that kind of had some symmetry there.
Well, and also based on the personnel that was on the roster in 2012.
Well, on 12, now remember, that was a team that had come off the Super Bowl and then did not make the playoffs the following year. But they still had a very imposing defensive front.
Without a doubt.
That even though they only had 33 sacks, which again to me is subpar, you want at least 42. They obviously did enough to intimidate quarterbacks into making bad throws.
Well, I could just bring up, I'm just looking back 2012, just to give you the idea of the quarterback hits that season, Paul. They had 64 quarterback hits that season. I'd say that's a pretty good number. On top of the 33 sacks that we mentioned, just to give you an idea, O.C. Umenyiora, JPP were 1 and 2, followed by Tuck, Chase Blackburn, and Linval Joseph. Those were your top 5 players in QB hits that season. So you still had a lot of the personnel from the Super Bowl team.
This year, the Giants had 83 quarterback hits, led by the 21 from Dexter Lawrence, which was the 6th most of all NFL defensive tackles.
Well, and it just goes back to show you that he can make an impact even though he doesn't necessarily get the sack numbers. And that's a big reason why the Giants invested in him from that perspective. All right, we'll open up the phone lines, but a few reminders before we do so. Giants Huddle Podcast, you can check that out. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can head to giants.com/podcasts. In terms of upcoming season opportunities for season ticket membership, you can take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. You can stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2024 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, you can visit giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants official connected TV streaming app, it's Giants TV. It brings you original video content, game highlights on demand, and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV, it's free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, as well as the Giants mobile app. All right, let's open up the phone lines and we check in with Bruce in Albany, joining us here on BBKL. What's happening, Bruce? What do you got for us?
Hey, you don't mind if I have a little 2020 hindsight?
Well, depends on where you take it. Yes.
Yeah, well, I'm going to have a couple of pairs, and the first pair is Laramie Tunzel and Eli Apple. We didn't take the gas mask guy because everybody was afraid to touch him, but Miami took him. And eventually, I think they wound up getting 2 number 1s and a number 2 for him, and they used it to rebuild their entire team.
Well, they traded him to the Texans. Yeah.
Then you got here's one. It's a wash. I thought that when they took Andrew Thomas, that he wasn't the best tackle, but now he's the best player on our team. And so who cares? But the next one, Rashawn Slater and the guy we traded to Kansas City.
Kadarius Toney, you're talking about.
Yes, we traded down to take Kadarius Toney. And I know John was high on Rashawn Slater. I believe he made the Pro Bowl his first year. And then most recently, I called up to tout Charles Cross because at the Combine, he was amazing. He moved like a safety. I think I talked to Paul about it. And
Cross was
him.
highly rated by me as well. I thought he would have been my next choice for the Giants had the other tackle been gone.
Well, the two at the top, they got all the hype. And Charles Cross, I think he was only 19 at the combine. And I said, this kid looks like a safety. And I said, well, he's not that strong. He's a teenager. So now he's rated as the third best tackle in the NFL. And we didn't take him either. So I know it's hindsight, but you got to have foresight because you can't wait 3 years to decide whether this guy can play or not. And I'm talking about Evan Neal. And I thought that Charles Cross, you projected him getting his man strength in the weight room. I thought he was the obvious pick. But I'm not criticizing. I'm just saying if you want to know how we got to where we got, that probably is a few good examples right there. There's 3 Pro Bowl. I think Charles Cross will be a Pro Bowl tackle. But you can't keep missing on these guys, not in the first round.
Sure.
Anyway.
Well, I mean, I think you could say that about every team in the NFL. I don't think that's necessarily just holding true for the Giants. That's across the board.
You know, I think after 10 years, if you want to come back and tell me this is what Neal did and this is what Cross did, that's a fair thing to do. But at the time, there was no doubt in my mind that Neal was the better pick and Cross would have been the fallback pick. The guy who I really wanted, everybody knows this, was Ekwonu. Ekwonu was my top lineman in that draft, and Neal was number 2, and I figured there's no way they would get Ekwonu. But then when they had the opportunity to get Thibodeau, all bets were off because Thibodeau was my favorite player in that draft. That's the guy that I felt they had to get. And when they got Thibodeau and then Neal, it was double thumbs up from me. I mean, because these were the 2 guys. If I had to go into the draft, I would have been very, very, very happy with those 2. So I'm not going to second guess them. I won't do it. But Cross would, had Neal also been gone, Ekwonu and Neal been gone, those are my top 2, I would have been fine taking Cross. He was my next tackle on the board.
Oh, I don't understand why they traded down with Rashawn Slater sitting there. I never that was Gettleman's doing.
Correct.
But
yeah,
I mean.
Well, I mean, once again, Bruce, you're operating
but
without knowing what their board looked like, keep in mind.
Correct.
And how they ranked all those players.
What's more important now is how Joe Shane ranks his board and what he thinks about this class.
I mean,
what happened before really is irrelevant.
Yeah, I mean, remember, Micah Parsons went in that same draft. So, I mean, you could have brought him up too. Giants fans talk about that all the time, but you don't know who they would have selected if they didn't move back. That's the problem.
And Parsons had other things in his folder that also dropped him.
But the point is, Parsons was still a great talent that was available. That's my point. I'm not talking about the intricacies of who the player was. Slater was there, Parsons was there, but we have no idea what the Giants' board looked like. That's the problem.
We had this comment. I feathered this out the other day that as of 2021. Picks 1 through 10 in the history of the draft, only 55% of them made a Pro Bowl. Just kind of remember that the next time you go over these kinds of things, because it really is a flip of the coin. 55% is basically a flip of the coin. Remember that.
One last thing. There's 2 parts to coaching. 1, recognizing talent and knowing what to do with it. And the Cowboys, what they did, they took a player that played pretty much straight linebacker, and they made a defensive end out of him. That's when his talent came through. Nobody really saw him as that. So I got to give the Cowboys credit for transforming him. But it's just I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying that's how we got what we got. We just made too many mistakes at the top of the draft.
There is no doubt. We'll let you go, but I agree with you on one very important point. Okay, one very important point, and that is, no matter who you draft, none of these guys are just add water, as Carl Banks likes to say, and they immediately become a top-notch professional. It doesn't work that way. There's a tremendous amount that goes into developing an NFL rookie. No matter how talented he is, there are so many factors that go into that player's ceiling. Some of it is talent, yes. Another part of it will be injuries. Another part of it will be his willingness to learn. Another part of it is going to be his intensity and relentless work ethic, or lack thereof. Another part of it will be the coaching staff that is required to develop him. There are so many multiple factors that have to come into play. And believe it or not, if any one of those dominoes falls in the wrong direction, it is very easy for a player to become a, quote, bust. It really is.
Sure.
I don't think people understand that. Again, 55% of picks between 1 and 10 have gone to a Pro Bowl. Folks, it's nearly a coin flip. Think about that. And that's not because of any one reason. It's because there are a multitude of reasons that can sidetrack a rookie into not fulfilling his potential. There can be many reasons. Understand that, please. So don't just go and say the Giants scouting staff screwed up and missed on guys. That is so shallow because every NFL team has missed on virtually half of the guys that they've ever drafted in the top 10. And it's not because they necessarily missed on talent evaluation. It could be any one of a handful of reasons I just explained to you.
Well, and the last caller's point, I think, spelled it all out when he brought up Micah Parsons going to Dallas and how Dallas utilized him. If Micah goes elsewhere, who's to say Micah's utilized the same way?
You'll remember when Parsons came out. Now, again, he had some bad stuff in his folder, which is why he dropped. Okay, he had stuff in his personnel folder that did not sit very well with a number of teams. That's why he went down. His talent was there, and as you'll recall, I consistently said going into that draft, the team that drafts Parsons better not use him as a standard linebacker. He has to be a pass rusher. He is a blitzer. That's where they better use him. And if you're not going to use him as a blitzer, there's no point in drafting Micah Parsons very high because you will not get what he is worth. I felt the same way about Isaiah Simmons.
Yeah, well, he's another example. He goes to Arizona, now he comes to the Giants, and he's a more productive player. So,
and more as the season went on, they started blitzing him more and more, and that's where his true value lies.
Well, and that's why it goes back to you can't just substitute players and give them to other teams and expect them to pan out.
Exactly.
That's what I've always been saying.
Scheme is absolutely another reason.
Yeah, but coaching and in the environment in which the player has to thrive, the organization.
Sure.
Case in point, a lot of people are going to debate C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young for years to come. You put C.J. Stroud in Carolina behind that offensive line, I don't know if we see C.J. Stroud to the degree that we're seeing in Houston. I'm not saying that Stroud doesn't have talent if he goes to Carolina, but what Houston's provided Stroud is a lot more promising than what Bryce Young has had to work with in Carolina. So it's very easy to make those debates and bring that to the forefront, but it's all hypothetical. You have no idea. If you take a player, you pluck him out of one team, you put him in a different uniform, and you put him elsewhere, there's no guarantee he pans out the same way or follows the same path. It's impossible to tell. So, these exercises are great. I understand fans like to do it, but it's the coulda, woulda, shoulda game. You're never going to know. You're never going to get to the bottom of any answer under those circumstances.
Well, think about Cameron Wake, right?
Yeah, former Dolphin.
Former Giant.
Yeah, well, but he went to the Dolphins.
Undrafted, comes out of Penn State undrafted. Giants had him in the offseason program for a short time. He was nothing to speak of. Leaves here. Nobody wants Cameron Wake. He goes up to Canada, all right? Plays for a couple years up in Canada. I think it was 2 years, maybe 3 years. I can't remember exactly how long he was up there. So Wake goes up to Canada. Now he's a free agent trying to come back to the National Football League. And nobody wants him. And he hooks up with the Miami Dolphins and becomes, I think, one of their top all-time 3 leading sackers in franchise history. And went to, how many handfuls
he had
of Pro Bowls?
100.5 sacks in his career.
Okay? So, what are we going to do?
5 Pro Bowls.
So, we're going to say that every general manager in the National Football League, when he came out of Penn State, they all missed. And then when he came back from Canada and nobody wanted him except the Dolphins, the other 31 teams all missed. Let's crucify all of them because they missed on Cameron Wake. It's just so silly to do that.
Yeah, and there's plenty of other examples.
No
in
question.
NFL history, if you went through the laundry list. Trust me, Cameron Wake is not the only individual. Let's head back to the phone lines. Jason's in New Haven joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Jason? What do you got for us?
Hey, guys. How you doing?
Doing all right.
Hi.
What's on your mind?
Good. Thanks for taking my call. It's been a while since I called. Just a few things. a few points, and either you can respond or I'll take it off the air. So I want to talk about, I know the season, of course it didn't go as, we planned. We struggled for the most part. And like Lance, you always say, just because you make the playoffs one year doesn't mean it's going to be necessarily the same success. So, Lance, I commend you for always, reminding fans or some fans that one year's success doesn't always translate to the next year. So, but the first thing I want to talk about is the positives I saw this year. I know everybody's kind of dwelling on the negatives, which of course we're going to dwell on because we just didn't have a good year. But first to me is Kayvon. I think he had I don't want to say he had a breakout season, but if I'm not mistaken, he was the first edge player that had double-digit sacks.
Correct. Under Wink. Yeah. He was the first
Wink.
player, period.
Right.
Whether he's an edge, interior, no one's ever had double-digit sacks in Wink's defense. So he's the first ever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I love the year he had. I hope to continue to see him ascend into, one of those top 10 kind of pass rushers. Another guy is Wandale. I think last year when he got hurt at the Lions game, I think we started to see kind of the vision for Wandale. Then I think he tore his ACL. And this year, I'm really excited to see where his career goes with us. You could put him all over the place. You could motion him. You give him the ball in the backfield, all kinds of ways, screens. So I'm excited about him. So those two players I was excited to see this year. As far as the offensive line, of course, we've been saying this for, who knows how long, ever since the Cine and O'Hara days. Our O-line just hasn't been up to snuff for various reasons. It could be the coaching. It could be maybe the way they scout the players. Who knows? I'm not in those meetings, so I can't really speak on that. But I will say, I don't know what our cap space is. I think it's projected to be around $25 million. I may be wrong or right.
Give or take a few, but they can always jimmy with that too. But yeah, give or take, yes.
Of course. I would like to see if we are going to make a free agent splash, quote unquote, per se. I would like to see a pretty good veteran offensive lineman, whether that be a guard or tackle. And I know people may jump down on me for the Neal thing, but I think he needs some competition. That's just my personal opinion. I could be wrong. Whether it be the injuries or whether the coaching we had maybe wasn't good enough. I know there's some good free agent linemen out there, so I would like to see us throw some money at a guy. Get a solid rock between John Michael and Thomas. Lastly, or two more points, I'll take it off the air. I love the way McKinney played this year. I don't know if he's going to price himself out of our realm because he did have a pretty good year. But
second half was very strong. Second half was very strong.
Very strong.
Yeah.
Yeah, he had a great second half of the year. I mean, fantastic. But what I will say, I don't know what Shane's ideology is when it comes to safeties.
Well, they had Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde in Buffalo, so, those two guys are pretty good the last time I checked.
Right. But I did like what I saw from Belton. I said it last year. He has this knack of always being around the ball.
He does.
And that's what I really like from secondary players. Is his tackling needs some work? Absolutely. I won't even deny that. He's not a very good tackler in open space. But he has this knack of always being around the ball, always getting his hands on the ball. And I don't think that could be spoken enough when it comes to either corner or safety. So if we aren't able, I would love to get McKinney back, but if we aren't able to re-sign McKinney, I think we'll be okay between Belton and, I forgot
Pinnock,
27's
you're talking
name.
about.
Pinnock, and then we drafted Owen. So I think we'll be okay. Last point, the draft. Now, I agree with you guys. Speaking about the draft and who might be where before the draft, I think is futile. But I will say this. I've been a big Daniel Jones supporter for a few years. And I still think he has some talent. But for whatever reason, whether it be the O-line, whatever the case may be, it just doesn't seem – and I'm willing to give him another shot. I'm not down on Daniel Jones. But I think this may be the year, and this is my opinion, this may be the year where Shane and Daves say to themselves, well, you know what? We inherited Jones. We like what we saw in him. He won us a playoff game last year, but he's not our guy. And I think any head coach or GM that comes in together should have an opportunity to draft their guy. Now, I'm not going to give any names as far as Caleb or May or whomever else is out there because who knows how the draft may go. But I think if there is a chance for them to get a quarterback and they are 100% lockstep, barrel, agree, hey, this is our guy going forward, I think this is the year where they may have to look into drafting a quarterback. I particularly like the guy from LSU, the guy that won the Heisman.
Jaden Daniels.
He is slight. He is kind of frail, but he has a strong arm and he's mobile. And I think in Dave's offense, I think you need somebody that's a little mobile. He doesn't have to be Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray, but I think you do need a guy that can move within the pocket, that can extend some plays, maybe some boot action, get him out on the run. So those are some of my points. And then lastly,
wait a minute, I thought this was your last point. Now you're adding more. Hold on. I mean, Jason, I'm keeping tally here. You're trying to sneak in a few more here. I mean,
go ahead.
This dissertation has like 17 bullet points here.
Shoehorn it in.
Yes.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was a sneaky move.
I will get off the line after this. I will say this about, and I'm not going to get into what's going on in social media, what's going on in reports about coaches, and so I'm not going to get into that. But what I will say is this. I believe in Dave's. He won us a playoff game last year. I don't know what happens behind closed doors, and maybe you guys don't. You know, I'm not privy to what goes on. But there was a caller yesterday that said, you know, kind of like down on Dave's. And my question is this. Every coach has their way of going about things, whether we agree with it or not. Football is a very, very, how do I say it? It's a lot of competition between coaches and players. So I think Dave is the man for the job. And if we look at some of our coaching greats, Coughlin and Jesus Christ, why can't I remember his name? Parcells. I'm sure everybody in the locker room or in the media didn't like those two. But you know what? They won a Super Bowl. So I think if Dave's wins some games next year, all this white noise in the background about who did what and this, that, and the third will be all for naught. So go G-Men, and I think you guys are taking my call.
Yep, you got it. Appreciate the phone call. Well, listen, the old story in sports in general is winning tends to cure everything. Mm-hmm. So you got to keep that in mind. I want to piggyback off of the point about the quarterback. And when you get a new coach and a new GM, that they should have a shot to bring in their own guy. Depends on what they think of the guy they're inheriting. Paul, you don't draft a quarterback for the sake of drafting a quarterback so you could say, okay, we brought in our own. Case in point, the Dolphins drafted Tua Tagovailoa before Mike McDaniel got there. Mm-hmm. McDaniel inherited Tua Tagovailoa. McDaniel's worked with Tua for each of the last 2 years. Did the Dolphins go out and draft a quarterback? The Bears drafted Justin Fields. I know they have the number 1 overall pick, so maybe they do grab a quarterback this year, but Matt Eberflus, he inherited Justin Fields. They've worked with Justin Fields for the last few years. So there's examples of new GM, new coach comes in, and they try to mold the guy they inherited into the player they want. I don't think there's any rule of thumb that says you're obligated to take a quarterback because you didn't put your fingerprints on the individual that was previously there. I think it depends on how you feel about the quarterback. If they feel great about the guy, why waste resources on something that's unnecessary? If they don't feel good about the guy, I'm all for take the guy you want. But I don't think there should be this philosophy, new GM, new coach, automatically they deserve a shot to bring in their own quarterback.
The Giants have 5 picks in the first 107 of this draft. If at any time when any of their first 5 picks come up, and that'll take them through the 4th round, they're going to pick the best guy available. They are not going to feel obligated at any one of those picks to say, oh my God, we've got to take a quarterback. Because if a quarterback is not at the top of their board at the time they pick in any of those rounds, they will not take one. You have to be, again, with the hit and miss probabilities on all positions, never mind quarterbacks, you've got to be all in on the guy that you take. You have to be. Think about this, right? We just told you 55% Pro Bowls for guys in the first 10 picks. Think about this. The odds already are only at 55%. If you take a guy who you're not all in on, how much have you lowered those odds?
Well, the other thing is, and I'll bring 2018 into the equation, I think the early stages of the first round could resemble 2018 this year, Paul. We had 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 10 in 2018. That's the last time that's happened. It's possible we get 4 quarterbacks in the top 10 this year.
I don't think there'll be more than 3.
Okay, I'm keeping the door open. I'm not saying it's guaranteed, but it's possible because remember, all it takes is for a team to move up, Paul. Remember, we're not going necessarily in the order. So the point is, as it stands right now, if the order stays as is, I can make an argument. The first 3 teams
could all do one.
Could all take a quarterback.
They could.
Do you agree with that?
Absolutely, they could.
Chicago, Washington, New England. All could very well take a quarterback.
Sure.
So there's 3 right there. That means all I need one more team, Paul, to take a quarterback in the next 7 picks to get to 4, which I think is feasible under the circumstances. But the point is, when you start getting to the 3rd, 4th, 5th quarterback taken, okay, it's highly unlikely that that was your first guy on the board, okay? Now, granted, everybody's going to have different rankings, but it gets to the point where you start eating away at teams' first choices at that position. So you have to ask yourself, do I settle? I may need a quarterback, but do I settle, Paul, for the 2nd or the 3rd guy on my draft board for just the quarterback? Forget all positions, because you also have to weigh how the quarterbacks rank against, to your point, other positions. And the chances of all of those quarterbacks panning out. And I'm telling you, it's slim to none. Because even if you go back to 2018,
well, it won't happen.
It's not going to happen. 4 or 5 guys are not all going to become franchise quarterbacks for their respective teams. So all things that any team, not just the Giants, needs to take into consideration when navigating what direction they want to go in. But we could still see a high volume of quarterbacks go. And the reason being is because, Paul, I think every team, they believe that their guy is going to pan out. And you should. You should have conviction, right? When you make a pick, you should believe that that is your guy based on the homework you did. No point in taking a pick if you don't feel very good about the player you're on the fence. So despite the skepticism that I'm sharing in terms of highly unlikely 4 or 5 quarterbacks are going to pan out who go early in the first round, I still don't fault the team for, as long as they've done their homework and their due diligence, they feel good about the guy, you take the guy without any hesitation.
I have no problem with anything you just said. Period. End of story.
Atlanta, by the way, watch out. If Belichick goes to Atlanta, they're number 8. Could they make a move up to go after a quarterback? It's possible. I wouldn't necessarily rule that out. Also, Denver and Las Vegas, 12 and 13, could see those 2 teams candidates to move up to grab quarterbacks. Denver, if they move on from Russell Wilson, and Las Vegas has Aiden O'Connell, but it's possible, they decide, hey, they want to find their franchise guy. No disrespect to Aiden O'Connell, but something tells me I don't think many people anticipated that he was going to be the number 1 quarterback for most teams based on where he was selected. All right, let's head back to the phone lines as we move forward here. Scott is in New Mexico, joining us on Big Blue Kickoff Live. What's happening, Scott? What do you got for us?
Hi guys. How you doing today?
You're right.
Just a clarification on a point you guys were making earlier. Isn't hiring a defensive coordinator also influenced by personnel, say Adoree Jackson and Xavier McKinney? Doesn't that influence, or doesn't personnel also influence who you hire as a
not necessarily
coordinator?
I mean, the coordinator candidates will come in here, and they will talk to the front office, and they will talk to the other assistants and Brian Dable, because we know that's a community decision. That's the way Brian Dable wants to run it. And they're all going to talk about, okay, what are some of the questions? Well, what do you see? They're going to ask the candidate, what do you see on our roster? What do you think you can do with our guys? And, oh, by the way, these are the guys who are pending free agents, and we may or may not have the ability to retain them.
Okay.
So, I mean, that will be discussed, but not quite the way. I mean, the way you're talking about, it almost seems like you're saying if the candidate says, I want McKinney to be here, then they're going to have to keep him. And I don't think it's going to work that way.
Well, and they'll probably ask the opinion, perhaps, of what he thinks of that person.
They might, but they also might tell him, we don't have the parameters to bring this guy back,
we don't have the resources.
He won't be here.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I was talking more as an influencer of whether you run a 4-3 or a 3-4 defense.
Well, we discussed that the other day on the show. There are a lot of factors involved there.
Right.
I personally believe that if you're going to go to a 4-3 guy who really is married to a 4-3 guy, a 4-3 scheme, and has for a lot of years, I think that means you have to rip up more floorboards to reconfigure your roster.
Okay.
So I would think that that's the lesser appeal for me. but it doesn't necessarily go that way for Coach Dable. You just don't know what he's thinking right now.
Here's the other thing. I don't know how Dable feels about the 4-3 versus a 3-4, but remember, he started in New England where they had a 3-4 scheme. So does that mean he's married to that
they're
and
multiple.
is looking for? No, but what I'm saying is the base was at least 3-4.
I get it. Yeah.
Does he feel as if he wants that to be the base? I don't know. I mean, that's only a question that he can answer. I'm not necessarily as rigid in terms of the thinking. I think if the defensive coordinator comes in and sells you on a 4-3 and says, I'm going to utilize the edge rushers this way, and it sounds good, and he's got experience in that department, transitioning players, then I would not shy away
It's
from
one
that.
small ingredient, Scott. To be honest, it's one small ingredient. It's not the overriding factor, I don't believe.
Okay.
Well, apparently somebody else disagrees under the circumstances. So there are other people that don't necessarily see eye to eye, Paul, with you, and people that are not even human beings. But yes, what else do you have for us, Scott?
Next, I have a couple of rapid-fire questions that I want to get to. The first has to do with, I always believe that you have to have a symbiotic relationship between a head coach, and a quarterback. I think you saw examples of that in the Green Bay game, where they had nondescript wide receivers and they totally annihilated Dallas. But I think it's the relationship that Matt LaFleur had with Jordan Love. And it's true throughout most of the NFL. If you have,
I think, Scott, if I could just interject, I think it's more of the play caller and the quarterback. I think that's far more important than the head coach, because Matt LaFleur is the play caller. So he fits both bills, but there are times where you have the head coach, he doesn't call plays. So not to say that relationship doesn't matter, but the play caller and the quarterback have to have a symbiotic relationship. That's what I think matters most.
Okay.
Yeah.
My next question is this. I was looking at the PFF grades. I know, Paul, you don't put a lot of stake sometimes in them.
Well, what did J.J. Watt just say?
I don't know. What did he just say?
You didn't see it? All right, take a look at my Twitter. He was on ESPN television, and he had a very strong quote about those grades. I don't think I need to say anything else.
Well, just real quickly so the rest of the audience can understand, his major point was that if you look at how coaches grade players versus PFF grades, it's very different. And players do. They look at the PFF grades, and then they look at what the coach graded, and it tends to be, there's a noticeable differential. That was his point.
Okay. I'll skip the point because basically what I was looking at is most of the lower grades that PFF came out with were offensive linemen. In fact, 4 of them.
Well, a blind man could see that, Scott, to be frank.
You're talking about for the Giants, though.
Yeah.
You're not just talking about in general in the NFL.
Trust me, you did not need even a high school diploma to figure that out.
Right, but one of them was surprising to me, which was John Michael Schmitz, and his grade came in at 41.
He had a rough final month of the season. He hit the rookie wall. Yeah. He had gotten hurt, hit the rookie wall, and his play was not as strong down the stretch.
Right.
I think that's fair.
Okay. My next point that I wanted to get to, and it's a question both of you can answer. This has to do with Saquon Barkley. There's not a lot of great runners coming out this year. But I want to read you a quote that he made, and I want to get your opinion, and I'll take everything else off the air. This is his quote in regards to whether he gets franchised or not. And this is a quote. They did it last year, so I'm numb to it. I don't have any feelings toward that at all. If you're going to do it, just do it. Don't wait until March 5th. Just get it over with. If not, let me go. Simple. And here's my question to you. The Giant offense seems to run through Saquon Barkley most of the time. I'm not saying all the time, but most of the time. There aren't a lot of great runners that are coming out, at least in the draft. I don't know who's free agency. You're going to have some good backs like Derrick Henry and so forth. I don't know what their costs are going to be. But if you are the general manager of the team, do you franchise him again, or do you offer him a contract? Because he doesn't sound like he's that happy about the situation of being franchised. And I'll take your answers off the air.
All right, Scott. Yep, appreciate the phone call. In fairness, I mean, Saquon doesn't have a choice, Scott, to answer your question. I mean, I know you said he doesn't want to be franchised. You find me a player in the NFL that is open to being franchised. It'll be the first player in NFL history that will enthusiastically tell you, oh, you're telling me I can't hit the market and I just need to accept this number? Absolutely. Sign me up for that. So my answer is going to be it's not a callous way of looking at it. It's just, Paul, Saquon doesn't have much of an influence in say because of the economics of football. So if the Giants feel it's the best pathway to retain a valuable player, they have the prerogative to do that because the salary cap and NFL rules and regulations allow them to do that. And if they have other priorities, which Paul and I have discussed, right, far beyond running back that need to be addressed, and you feel you don't want to lose your best offensive weapon. And remember, Joe Shane at his midseason presser referred to him as their best offensive weapon, which is why they didn't want to trade him. Then you know they see him as valuable. If in order to get him within the books, they feel it's smart to at least start off franchising him, then you franchise him. And if you have to go down the same road, so be it. I'm sure Saquon's not going to be enthusiastic about it, but that's the nature of the beast. I think they could very well entertain an offer, but that's more of, Paul, now it's in Saquon's ballpark. I mean, is he open to something that is reasonable to what was in the ballpark of last season, or do the Giants have the leverage, which they do because they could give him the tag, and it's not a number that he's open to. But, I mean, the Giants, there's no doubt about it, the Giants have the leverage again. That has not disappeared because they could tag him. I don't think those dynamics have changed. If you can't make a long-term deal work, yes, I would absolutely entertain the tag. I would not shy away from that.
I think the way that Dable and Shane talk about him, there's no question on my mind he'll be on this team in the fall. And I do think they will reach an accord because they were able to do it last year. After they had the tag, it was late in the conversation, after the tag had already been placed on, that Barkley had brought in another piece of representation to help out the negotiations. And what happened? They talked to Joe Shane again, and Joe's like, okay, fine. Let's see what we could do. Let's rip up the tag, and we'll just make it a one-year deal. And they did that. Well, that showed some creativity, and it showed some want to on both sides. I believe when you have creativity and you have want to on both sides, you find a way to make a deal done that makes both people somewhat happy and satisfied, which is why I think it will happen again. And remember, the incentive for Barkley at this point is he's now 6 years into his career, and he got nicked up again this past season. And he's already found out that the free agent market for running backs is somewhat muted. He's learned a lot more about what the numbers are than what he knew last year.
Sure.
He's much more educated about this. So I think he will approach it differently. And I think the Giants, understanding that, hey, you know what? We think, and again, that the salary cap number for the season in 2024 has not been established. By all guesstimates maybe is a better word.
It's going to go up.
People are pegging the Giants to have between 20 and 25 mil under the cap. But again, that's always fluid. But it would also behoove the Giants, if they can sign him to at least a 2 or 3 year deal, they can probably get his cap number down by at least 50% in 2024. So it does really, when you get down to it, it helps both sides if they can do a deal. And I think both sides understand that.
But you may have to tag him initially in order to get to that stage. It's possible.
You may have to.
That happens.
You may have to. I don't necessarily know if they will, because I think ultimately there'll be a deal.
Well, I think in an ideal world that would be the case. But remember, the dynamics are also a little bit different because you had a choice between Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. You had to weigh that.
Yes.
Okay? They got the deal done with Daniel. You don't have that. I would say the only other candidate, in my estimation, to receive the tag is Xavier McKinney. Not to say that they're going to do that, Paul, but he'd be a candidate at least.
He would be a candidate. Right? The number, though, for a safety is rather high.
It is. But, also the safety market in general has not panned out to where players had hoped for. Very similar to running back, right? You look at Julian Love, for example, and the deal that he ultimately got in Seattle. Even Jordan Poyer in Buffalo, who I brought up, he didn't get what he had anticipated. So, that depends. Sometimes a safety may welcome the tag under those circumstances if the number's a little bit higher than maybe what they would get on a long-term deal. But maybe the pressure is not on the Giants so much because you're not making a big decision between a running back and a quarterback. Does that give you leeway? But here's the thing. Once you let a guy test the market, all bets are off.
Well,
that's why there is value in tagging a guy.
Yes.
Because then the negotiation, Paul, is just between you and the player.
It may
and not everybody
It
else.
may come down to having to do the tag again to buy more time for negotiations.
Yeah.
I don't dispute that at all. It may come down to that.
And that's where I'm coming from.
But ultimately, I do believe they will wind up with a contract.
Let's head back to the lines. We got Steve in D.C. joining us here on BBKO. What's happening, Steve? What do you got for us?
What's happening, fellas? Happy New Year, Lance. And,
Same to you.
Hey, listen. First of all, Paulie D, Happy New Year to you.
You too.
Listen, it's been a while, Lance, as you know, you probably recognize the voice. I'm one of the originals, man. And definitely past the 76. And, listen, I got a lot of them say I probably won't be able to get a chance to get it out. You guys kind of threw me off with the Saquon Barkley thing. First thing I want to say is, number one, I came into the season believing in two things and two things only about this team after last year, and that was Dayball and that was Shane. And unfortunately, I'm not saying to throw these guys out, but I can no longer give them the benefit of the doubt. As far as the Saquon thing, since that's the last thing you guys were talking about, we have absolutely no business whatsoever even mentioning the word, franchise tag when it comes to Saquon Barkley. Number one, we should have traded him at the bye instead of not answering the phone. Number two, if we'll just let him hit the market, make whatever offer we're going to make, let him hit the market. His most value is with us. He does not want to go anywhere else. We would be a fool to go ahead and bid against ourselves again. So we figure out what his value is. We make our offer, and if he does not take it, let him walk. I said 2 years ago the best thing that could happen for Saquon Barkley is if we were dumb enough to tag him 2 years in a row. Listen, only thing I really came to talk about today is the one thing that most real football people and real true fans are willing to put on as priority. The elixir is what we're missing. Daniel Jones, despite the fact that I have never believed in his talent since the minute he got here, the reality is this. You have two hurt necks and an ACL and bad performances. You got undrafted free agents outplaying you, on top of, everybody else that can get out there. Listen, we cannot afford to get cute. We can't sit here and talk about other teams coming up to get quarterbacks like we can afford to pass on one. I don't know who our guy is. I have a feeling that who our guy is going to be, probably the one we say we can't get, but I will have no respect for this organization ever again if we do not make a serious attempt to go out and get our guy or roll the dice at 6. Period.
Yeah, but I mean, it's possible. It's possible when they pick at 6, though. This was the point I was making, that their guy is no longer there. So you're saying you want them to take a quarterback regardless, even though that quarterback's not high on their board? That's what you're arguing?
That's the most foolish comment that you could make.
Well, listen. First of all, I think number one, I do believe Chicago is going to move out that pick. I believe Washington will give up way more than we consider. I do believe that second pick will be up for offer. Now, whether you are I think, number one, Chicago's not taking a quarterback.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, they could hold on. They could very well move past Justin Fields and get a new guy. They're bringing in a new offensive coordinator. It's not crazy. It's not that much of a stretch.
Listen, they could. Like I'm saying, I'm just speculating. I don't think they're going to. One part of the reason is they're coaching. Number two, I think they can get a boatload of picks by moving down twice. I believe they believe in Fields. I believe in Fields. Okay, and the reality is this. So, the teams how they kept the coach. If they were to move down to the second spot, I believe that second pick will be available. If we decided to move up to 4, because I know Arizona's not taking a quarterback, we could either Drake May or Daniels will be there. Caleb is obviously the one that's coming off the board first. I actually like Daniels. But you know what? I also feel like we can't get cute. We could take, whether it's McCarthy or Penix, or I don't even care if you take Bo Nix, all of them far better options than what we got right now. Far better. It's one pick. Your team is built by your later round picks, which they have not proven to be all that successful with those yet either. So don't cry to me about one pick. If you're going to pick at 6, it's unacceptable. You cannot sit here and try to build a team without elixir.
Let me make sure, before we send you on your way, let me make sure that I understand. Okay. Now, are you saying force the quarterback pick no matter what? Or are you okay if at some point in the first 2 days of the draft, they take a quarterback in the top 3 rounds? What is your gumption here?
What I'm saying is this. I think that all the other teams, we're not the smartest people in the room. If other people saying there's probably 3 to 4 quarterbacks that are going to go in the top 10, we ought to be one of them. Is what I'm saying.
So you're saying they got to take a quarterback in the top 6 is what you're saying, or top 10?
All of them are far better prospects than the walk-on from Duke that's on our team right now. So don't you tell me they're not worth the 6 picks.
I'm sorry, they're not, but they're not. They're not. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Well, I mean, Steve, listen, we appreciate the phone call. I think it's a little bit of a stretch to say that every single prospect is better than Daniel Jones.
That's so foolish.
Well, when none of these guys have played one snap in the NFL. So, I mean, that to me can't be supported by fact.
And I'm gonna throw it back at him. He's citing Daniel Jones's neck injuries, right, and his knee injury. But what about Penix, who is a terrific prospect, but has had 4 season-ending injuries in college?
Sure.
So he hasn't even been drafted yet, and the guy's got an injury history longer than a toll ticket at the New Jersey Turnpike.
Well, and it's possible that Penix doesn't even go in the first round. I mean, based on that.
He just said, though, all these quarterbacks.
Well, I didn't hear him name Penix. I mean, he did throw out Bo Nix and J.J. McCarthy, so those are beyond the top 3 that most people are anticipating.
Let me say this.
Now you're 5 quarterbacks deep.
I happen to like Bo Nix myself. I do like Bo Nix, okay? He is not, I don't think, by anybody's stretch of the imagination, worth the 6th overall pick in the draft, okay? I don't think so. Maybe there are other people who think he is. I think, in my evaluation, I like Bo Nix. And if the Giants decided to take Bo Nix later on at some point down the road, whether they moved into the back of the first round or they took him in the second round if he was still there, you could absolutely make a case for that because they do have a veteran quarterback who's coming off a serious injury, who has had previous injury history. And so maybe Bo Nix sits for a year or 2 and develops. See, that's the other thing. My philosophy on drafting a young quarterback is he sits for a year or 2. You don't immediately draft a young quarterback and tell that rookie he's got to play right away. So I'm like in the middle here. There are those people who think the Giants have to draft a rookie quarterback high in the first round and he has to play opening day in September. Personally, I think that's insane. Okay.
Well, he may have to.
He may have to.
Ready to go. He may not have a choice under the circumstances.
And if you don't have a choice, then that's the way it is. I mean, if you don't have a choice, but if you have a choice, I think that's just way too dramatic to go. Then you've got other folks who think that, okay, don't draft a quarterback at all. Maybe go for a stopgap veteran, like what they did with Tyrod Taylor, who could be a placeholder if Daniel Jones needs to take September off as he rehabs.
Sure.
That's another way to go. I don't know if I 100% agree with that either, which is why I'm probably in the middle that says, okay, if you want to draft a young quarterback who you have some belief in as a developmental quarterback who will sit for a year or 2, I'm probably a little bit more in that camp than I am the other 2. But for Steve, who's a good long-time caller, to say they've got to take a quarterback in the top 10 no matter who it is, there is a quarterback in the top 10 who is a must-draft, that is absolutely the most backwards kind of mentality that a team could have.
Well, once again, I go back to, first of all, I find
How do you think the Jets feel about doing what they did for Sam Darnold? They had to get a quarterback. They traded up to go get him. How'd Sam Darnold work out?
Well, that's why I utilized 2018. He's part of that 2018 draft class, which
no
is the
question.
last time you had 4 guys in the top 10, and clearly they all didn't pan out. Now, in fairness, Darnold also went to an environment, which goes back to how we started the show, which was not necessarily ideal in helping develop a quarterback when you don't have an offensive line and you have movement on the offensive coordinator front.
Don't you have a questionable offensive line here right now, too?
Well, there's a lot of question marks. There's no doubt about that. But
so how is it different?
No, but if you are going to sit the quarterback, there could be value in saying, okay, we're going to groom him. We have Daniel Jones, and he can learn. I mean, look at how Jordan Love went. It's not necessarily a bad philosophy. I have no problem with that.
Of the three ways to go, I am definitely more on line with you draft a guy who's going to sit for a year or 2.
Well, they have to address the quarterback position.
Right. Joe Shane said he did.
I mean, there's going to be something that has to be done this offseason. That's a given. The question is, do you use high draft capital to do it? Do you go into free agency? Do you make a trade? All of those resources are going to be at their disposal. But I just circle back to, I find it hard to believe that, Paul, everyone in the Giants front office feels that good about 5 different quarterbacks.
I'm sure they don't.
So my point is, getting back to the caller, to put a bow on this conversation, when you say if you're at 6, you got to take a quarterback, you're settling. Probably under those circumstances, you are settling for somebody. There's not conviction across the room. And you also can't operate under the fact that Arizona and the Chargers are staying as is. If there's a team that wants a quarterback and neither of those want one, and I'm a believer that neither of them will go after a quarterback, I think Gannon feels pretty good about Kyler Murray, and we know what Herbert could do for the Chargers. Somebody could move up into 4 or 5, which means by the time you select at 6, if you don't move, there could very well be 3 to 4 quarterbacks off the board, which, once again, you have to be a believer that everyone loves the 5th quarterback left. And I find that very hard to believe.
Look, the Cardinals absolutely believed at 10 that Josh Rosen was going to be their next answer. They felt compelled. We have to draft a quarterback. Well, when you get into that mode and say you have to draft a quarterback, the odds are not really good that it's going to turn out well.
Well, and there's another example of a horrendous offensive line that played in front of Josh
Rosen.
Not making excuses, but if you go back,
he was never any good anyway.
Well, he never had a shot, though.
But
Paul,
it
no
is
matter
true.
How you feel, he never had a shot. And oh, by the way, they wound up firing the coach the following year.
Right.
And then you bring in a new coach who wanted Kyler Murray as his quarterback. So it wasn't a very strong destiny that was going to play out in the desert for Josh Rosen, whether you love his talent or not, which goes back to, once again, how we started the show. All right, that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. We'll be up and running again on Friday as we continue to evaluate all that is happening during the course of this busy NFL offseason that has already begun for several teams in the National Football League. You can stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Meadow. We'll speak to you on Friday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.
Introducing Uber Teen Accounts. If you have a teenager, you probably drive them around a lot. Maybe you're even driving them right now. New Uber Teen Accounts are a parent-supervised Uber account with always-on safety features that let your teen request a ride when you can't take them yourself. Your teen gets to ride with a highly rated driver, and you get to follow along with real-time notifications and live trip tracking in your Uber app. Add your teen to your Uber account today. Available in select locations. See app for details.
If you're a smoker or dipper looking to make a change, you really only need one reason to do it. But with Zyn nicotine pouches, you can find many. Zyn is America's #1 nicotine pouch. It's made with only 6 simple ingredients. Plus, Zyn is the only nicotine pouch with a 10-day hassle-free trial. There are lots of options when it comes to nicotine satisfaction, but there's only one Zyn. Find your Zyn online or in a store near you at zyn.com/find. Warning, this product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical.